German submarines, known as U-boats, are often said to have dominated the Atlantic throughout World War II as an almost omnipotent weapon. But is that really true? February 1939. Hitler himself presents the world with a new showpiece of the German Navy, the battleship Bismarck. Chancellor Hitler presides over the launching of this first German 35,000-ton battleship, 242 meters long. The largest warship ever built in Germany slides slowly into the sea. It is a staged display of power meant to impress potential enemies, because since the destruction of its fleet after the First World War, Germany has no longer been a naval power. The Führer has ignored the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, but rebuilding the Navy takes years. The Bismarck is imposing, but will it really be able to rule the seas? Some admirals in Hitler's general staff doubt it. Erich Raeder, commander-in-chief of the Kriegsmarine, favors heavyweights like the Bismarck or the Tirpitz, its sister ship launched 2 months later. Hitler wants to deploy them as quickly as possible, yet the Grand Admiral notes, as far as the Kriegsmarine is concerned, it is, of course, by the fall of 1939, by no means sufficiently equipped for the great struggle with England. His subordinate sees it the same way, Rear Admiral Karl Dönitz. His alternative to confrontation on the surface, weapons of war that are comparatively inexpensive and easy to produce in large numbers. In addition, they can move unobtrusively across all the world's oceans, U-boats. This strategy is controversial. Raeder does not support it. A rivalry develops between the two admirals. On September 1, 1939, Hitler invades Poland with his troops. The attack is carried out mainly over land and is supported by a battleship that shells the garrison in the port of Danzig. The Kriegsmarine is supposed to prove its strength. In response to the aggression against their Polish ally, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. The same day, the U-boats enter the action. Their target, enemy warships. But the first attack hits an unarmed passenger ship. Several boats take the shipwrecked aboard. A survivor reports.
About 2 o'clock the next morning, we were drifting around and spotted the submarine, thinking at first it was one of the destroyers come to our rescue. And we turned around and tried to drift away from it, which we did. And we drifted for about 4 more hours when we were finally picked up by the destroyer.
112 people die, including Americans. Fearing the United States might enter the war, the Nazi leadership initially tries to cover up the sinking. The facts only come to light later. The German U-boats are already in battle formation. Their opponents in the West, however, are not. There has not yet been a confrontation on land. The British and French take their time mobilizing their armies. Then dramatic news arrives from northern Scotland. In mid-October, a flagship of the British fleet, the Royal Oak, is sunk at the naval base of Scapa Flow, a symbolic place. 20 years earlier, the Imperial German fleet had scuttled itself here. Now, they want revenge. The commander of U-47, who fired the torpedoes, becomes a propaganda legend. Kapitänleutnant Günther Prien, described as an arrogant character and fanatical Nazi, is enthusiastically received upon his return to Germany. Hitler personally awards him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. The U-boat crew becomes heroes of the Third Reich, proud to have penetrated to the heart of the enemy.
Wir haben uns durchgemogelt durch die Bewachung und waren plötzlich drin. Wir haben unsere Torpedos gelöst, im nächsten Augenblick krachte es und erst wurde der Repulse getroffen und dann flog die Heulog in die Luft. Der Eindruck war unermesslich. Und wir haben uns auf demselben Wege in ähnlicher Weise, wie wir reingekommen sind, auch wieder hinausgeschlichen.
U-boat sailors had long been underestimated. Now they achieve a new status. Otto Kretschmer, another well-known commander, admits that after 4 years of training, they felt like the elite of the Navy. The U-boats quickly proved themselves superior to the battleships. In addition, one of the showpieces of the Kriegsmarine, the Graf, is hit by the British Royal Navy and subsequently scuttled by her own captain, a blow to Grand Admiral Raeder. Hitler then orders the expansion of the U-boat fleet. The budget for a Bismarck or a Tirpitz corresponds to 50 U-boats, which are considered better suited to attack the Allies. Dönitz prevails over his superior, but later concedes that in 1939, Germany was not ready for war. It possessed only 22 Atlantic-capable U-boats. The French and British at that time have roughly twice as many submarines as the Germans. Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat force, promises Hitler victory. His plan: cut the British Isles off from international trade. Great Britain imports at this time almost 50% of its meat, 70% of its sugar, and 90% of its grain and fats. 22 million tons of food per year. The country is therefore heavily dependent on the thousands of ships that supply it, an easy target for the U-boats that attack this lifeline day after day. The result: in March 1940, hungry England must ration certain foods. Shortages occur. Public gardens are turned into vegetable patches. The war of attrition begins to show results. The British feel their daily lives worsening. The public pressures the government to end the blockade. Some ministers are even willing to negotiate with the enemy. Only the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, categorically rejects this. Subsequent events soon prove him right. 8 months after the declaration of war, fighting begins on land. In just 6 weeks, the French army is overrun by the Wehrmacht. With this blitz victory, the naval bases on the French coast fall into German hands. From Norway to France, the Nazis control Europe's coasts. The gates to the Atlantic now stand wide open to the U-boats. Only Great Britain still opposes the German Reich. In the summer of 1940, Royal Air Force pilots offer fierce resistance to attacks by the German Luftwaffe. Hitler's goal is also to conquer the British Isles, but after 3 months, Great Britain hands the German Reich its first defeat, a victory in the air. At sea, however, 245 ships are sunk, the equivalent of 2 shipwrecks per day. The German Navy, by contrast, loses only 7 U-boats. This clear imbalance later prompts Churchill to say, the only thing that truly frightened him during the war was the U-boat threat. Dönitz has achieved his goal. German U-boats are causing serious alarm among the Allies. In the autumn of 1940, he begins establishing bases along France's Atlantic coast. His headquarters shifts to the strategically important port of Lorient. Stationed in Brest, Lorient, or Saint-Nazaire, the submarines save roughly a week of sea time compared with home ports in Germany, since they bypass the North Sea and the Royal Navy-controlled English Channel. The balance after 1 year of war, while almost 600 Allied ships are sunk, German losses amount to 8 U-boats, But that is not enough to destroy the British merchant fleet. Dönitz must increase the pressure. He tries a strategy with which he already has good experience. Wolfpack Tactics. From now on, U-boats attack in groups. With the help of the Kriegsmarine's radio intelligence, enemy merchant ships are located. Another U-boat sailor admits it was great fun to attack entire convoys. Everyone chose his own victim. The hunt is easy because when they are on the surface, the grey wolves are faster than merchant ships. Yet contrary to persistent post-war legends, the U-boats are not capable of attacking constantly underwater. At that time, they are still very ship-like and can only make short dives. When submerged, an electric motor takes over for the diesel engine, which cannot be operated underwater, drastically reducing range. The speed is just enough to follow slow freighters. It is hardly possible to launch decisive attacks underwater. In addition, the torpedoes often explode too early. U-boat commander Heinz Schaefer reports the tanker breaks apart in the middle. Every crew member is allowed to take a look through the periscope. The mighty ship sinks into the waves, an overwhelming sight. The demon of destruction is at work here. Through the simultaneous attack, several ships can be destroyed in a single action. At night, ambushes are especially effective. Afterward, the attacker disappears silently into the dark waters of the Atlantic. From Newfoundland to Ireland, freighters must navigate between the wolves. Large convoys of 10 or 20 ships put to sea, 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. Then the rule is, keep your distance 500 meters between each ship and never stop, even if a ship is sunk. Life on board goes on, thanks to the Royal Navy rum ration meant to maintain sailors' morale. Yet fear dominates daily life. An officer of the Merchant Marine, John Harvey, who crossed the Atlantic 12 times, reports, one had more hope than fear. With a cargo of ore, you slept in your clothes and hoped you could escape, because the ship sank within 3 minutes. If it was a cargo of explosives, you went to bed in pajamas and were glad to wake up the next day. The Royal Navy initially reacts calmly to the underwater threat. It first relies on ASDIC, a precursor to sonar that can locate a U-boat at up to 900 meters. The Admiralty initially believes that corvettes, light ships with weak armament, equipped with depth charges, are sufficient to protect the huge convoys. Churchill calls them cheap and nasty but inadequate. Officer Harvey reports his worst memory was sailing right through the survivors of a sunk corvette and being unable to do anything because a convoy was not allowed to stop. The Royal Navy assumes U-boats attack less frequently the larger the convoys are, because the ships cover each other. But for the sailors of the Merchant Marine, this tactic is not enough. They feel threatened because they are too easy to locate. Since all ships must travel at the speed of the slowest, the freighters are vulnerable. At roughly 8 miles per hour, it is like crossing the Atlantic on a bicycle, and the risk increases tenfold when the naval escorts turn back halfway to protect the next convoy, a weakness Hitler's navy quickly exploits. On October 5, 1940, Convoy SC-7 with 35 freighters leaves Nova Scotia, Canada, bound for Liverpool. During the crossing, they are attacked by 8 U-boats, one of them under the command of the feared Otto Kretschmer. Only a single corvette escorts the convoy. By the time they arrive in England, 20 ships have been sunk, including an oil tanker, a record. Added to this, is the loss of 12 more freighters from another convoy on the same route. With 32 ships sunk within 48 hours, Hitler's Grey Wolves record their greatest success to date. Dönitz, who personally coordinated the operation, triumphs, especially since all 8 of his U-boats remain undamaged. At this early stage of the war, convoys lose roughly 20% of their cargo on average. In 1940, 563 ships are sunk and only 23 German U-boats destroyed. Even so, the hoped-for outcome doesn't materialize. Despite all that tonnage lost, most freighters still make port, and the British have adapted their agriculture and livestock. The period of shortage is over. The lieutenant of U-32 concedes, under the current conditions, the English can hold out for years. You only have to look at the shops. The U-boat arm won't be able to break them. The naval blockade doesn't seem to dent British morale. Admiral Dönitz can't increase the pressure further. He can put only 35 U-boats to sea at any one time, far too few. Boats pulled from the arsenals merely offset the losses. From the highest level, he is denied additional resources. The admiral's demands are often pushed behind those of the generals, who enjoy higher status in the Nazi hierarchy. The head of the Luftwaffe, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, keeps demanding more. New heroes join the roster of legendary commanders with every victory. After the Bull of Scapa Flow, Joachim Schepke becomes famous. He is even called to Berlin to report on his successes as commander of U-100. Yet the so-called Tonnage King is still Otto Kretschmer, also called Otto the Silent. The commander of U-99 sinks a total of 47 ships. Nazi propaganda tirelessly praises the deeds of its heroes. Always present, the cameras of Nazi propaganda. Relentlessly, the wolves are shown like demigods, images that forge a legend meant to last for many years. In reality, the U-boat's attacks primarily strike merchant ships. A crew member of U-55 admits, "We sink everything without warning, but the British must not know that. We always let the crew drown. What else are we supposed to do?" An order that violates the laws of war. The victims are mostly civilians left to their fate. The German U-boat crews show no mercy. At best, they toss the shipwrecked some bread and a compass and wish them good luck. No one is spared. A crew member reports, "The commander of the U-boats passed on. There is a convoy, a children's transport. The children's transport was very large. We sank the children's transport. All are dead." In the first 18 months of the war, British military technology has advanced. ASDIC now detects U-boats at 2,000 meters, making counterattacks more effective. The risk for the U-boats grows. The same day, Otto Kretschmer is captured southeast of Iceland after his U-99 is badly damaged. The most successful commander is a decisive catch for the Allies. Within 2 weeks, the Wolfpack is leaderless. Dönitz is in trouble. In May 1941, one of the Nazis' cipher machines, an Enigma, arrives at MI6 in Bletchley Park. The device and its codebooks come from a U-boat seized by a British destroyer. Commander Fritz Julius Lemp, who sank the passenger liner Athenia, failed to scuttle U-110, letting the British grab the equipment left aboard. Lemp dies. His crew is taken prisoner. The boat sinks later. The Nazis know nothing of this and therefore don't change their encryptions. A breakthrough for the Allies in the intelligence war. The complex codes are broken. Now a machine devised by mathematician Alan Turing deciphers enemy traffic within 40 hours. The most critical transatlantic convoys are rerouted for protection. If every transport were covered, suspicion would rise. So the Admiralty sacrifices some ships to preserve this priceless edge. The Nazis' strategy remains unchanged. U-boats sink 5 times more freighters than German surface warships. Grand Admiral Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, is convinced the big battleships still matter. In May 1941, he sends the showpiece of his fleet, the formidable Bismarck, on its first Atlantic sortie. It is considered unsinkable. Even Churchill knows it is the most powerful battleship in the world. Only a week after departure, the Royal Navy is on the hunt. The British fire nearly 3,000 shells at her. Eventually, she goes down with her 2,000-man crew in the North Atlantic. The Bismarck does not survive her maiden voyage. Hitler then orders the battleships back to Germany. The Reich cannot hold the seas permanently. Only the U-boats keep up the illusion. On June 22, 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union, a surprise blow. Wehrmacht divisions punch through enemy lines and seize vast territory. The Red Army seems cornered. Dönitz is ordered to block any support bound for the USSR. He dispatches his packs to the Arctic Circle, where Allied convoys steam to Murmansk. The Grey Wolves now roam the Arctic Ocean, one of the most hostile regions on Earth. Conditions aboard are brutal. The extreme cold drains everything from the crew. At this point in the war, German U-boats operate in several theaters, from the North Atlantic to the Mediterranean. They are still sinking more ships than the Allies are producing, but American industry hasn't had the last word.
A vast shipbuilding program is perhaps the most vital at the moment. Shall we beat the Axis effort to torpedo our plans for attack? The answer is yes.
By the end of 1941, the United States becomes the arsenal of Hitler's enemies. Tanks, aircraft, and ammunition are turned out at high speed to support Europe. In the Baltimore shipyards, the first Liberty freighters, literally freedom ships, are launched. More of this type are built than any other. 2,710 ships are produced in ever faster succession. The record belongs to a yard owned by industrialist Henry J. Kaiser. It builds a Liberty in just 4 days. These new cargo ships symbolize the might of American war industry. They can load up to 10,000 tons, jeeps, locomotives, tanks, aircraft, and can be converted into oil tankers or dry cargo carriers. They make roughly 12 miles per hour, fast enough to outrun the U-boats. Up to 40 armed Marines are on board. The German Navy does not expect such an armada. Another event shifts the situation again. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. The United States officially enters the war. Dönitz deploys his U-boats in Operation Drumbeat off the American East Coast. The goal: sink as much enemy tonnage as possible. The Grey Wolves face a challenge. The U.S. coast lies 3,400 miles from Lorient, a nerve-wracking odyssey for the crews. In spring 1942, German U-boats cruise in U.S. territorial waters. so close to shore that crews can admire the city lights. Dönitz states, "Our boats discovered very early the best procedure. During the day they dive between 50 and 150 meters deep, a few miles off the freighter's route. At dusk they approach the coast and surface when night falls." The American coast becomes dangerous ground. The task is eased by the incompetence of the U.S. Navy leadership. The Chief of the Navy, Admiral King, does not take the U-boat threat seriously. He is too focused on the war against Japan. Despite warnings from his British allies, King rejects the use of convoys for a long time. He considers them unnecessary, a position that splits the military leadership. General Eisenhower writes, exasperated in his diary, "One thing that could help win this war is to get someone to shoot King." The U-boats sent to U.S. waters in several waves sink 397 ships in the first 6 months. One ship's captain reports he pulled shipwrecked sailors from the water who had suffocated on fuel oil. Once he rescued a woman whose torso was split in two. Canada is not spared either. German U-boats push into the St. Lawrence River, the starting point of numerous convoys. Freighters sink before the eyes of the Canadian Navy. Residents of coastal regions are instructed to black out their windows and cover their car headlights. The year 1942 is viewed as the peak for German U-boats. 10,322 ships struck stand against only 87 boats lost. That's 15 sunken ships for every German U-boat destroyed. Every month, 20 fresh units join the pack. By late 1942, Dönitz has about 210 operational U-boats at hand. In January 1943, Hitler makes Dönitz Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. Grand Admiral Raeder must give way to the tireless champion of the U-boats. Dönitz revels in the triumph, but he assumes command at a highly unfavorable moment. Early 1943 marks a turning point in the war. The Wehrmacht is retreating on all fronts. In the Atlantic, the Allies now field 800 warships escorting convoys, an effective counter to the U-boat threat. Backed by technical advances, this striking power grants the Allies decisive advantages. Since 1940, the U.S. military has perfected a British-developed detection system, radar, a tremendous leap forward. The new compact sets in reconnaissance aircraft noses cover a 300-kilometer radius. Before, it was only 35. German U-boat commander Heinz Schäfer laments, "They can now detect us in any weather, rain, fog, or night, as long as we're on the surface. Our chances to attack shrink, our losses rise. Perhaps our leadership underestimated radar's possibilities." The danger of detection makes surface approaches extremely risky. The boats can no longer hide or communicate. Their radio traffic is intercepted by the so-called Huff Duff, a direction finder that can locate enemy transmitters. From 1942 onward, the Allies mount the devices on ships in convoys. Without communication, the Grey Wolves can no longer coordinate. The Wolfpack hunt is over. An officer on Dönitz's staff notes, "The enemy has all the trumps in his hand. He knows all our secrets. We do not know a single one of his." Beyond detection instruments, weaponry has advanced sharply. Reconnaissance aircraft with radar also carry the new Mark 24 torpedoes with high accuracy. Thanks to powerful new searchlights, U-boats are as visible at night as in daylight. The hunt runs around the clock. U-boat Commander Schäfer remarks, "The submarine has no time to bring up its anti-aircraft guns. The men at the mounts are raked with fire. The boat is lost. Rarely does even one man escape death. Another deadly weapon, the hedgehog. It fires 24 charges around a boat. The odds of sinking a U-boat rise markedly, thanks to fuses that explode only on contact with the target. Then puddles of fuel spread on the surface, proof of death in the depths. In 1942, a U-boat crew's life expectancy is more than 12 months. A year later, it is only 90 days. The Allies have found the right countermeasures. They gain the upper hand. Dönitz must concede. His dream of sinking more ships than the Allies could build has burst. On the 18 American shipyards, the average construction time for a Liberty freighter is now down to just 40 days. On May 24, 1943, the Grand Admiral halts the convoy battle in the North Atlantic and pulls the U-boats back. Yet Dönitz hasn't thrown in the towel. His new idea. We know that the mere presence of our U-boats ties down 2 million enemies. Therefore, despite everything, our boats must go out to distract the foe, even if they no longer sink a single ship. 15 U-boats are scattered across the North Atlantic to fake multiple packs. Dönitz bets everything on one card, trusting his most seasoned commanders. But the effort is futile. One after another, the last gray wolves are sunk. Fear spreads among the crews. In 1943 alone, the German Navy loses 244 U-boats. Heinz Schaefer writes, "We are embittered. We curse the war, humanity, the inventors of the U-boats, ourselves." After 4 years of war, more than half of all U-boats have gone down. The fangs of the grey wolves are blunt. Since the Allied landing in Normandy, Nazi Germany has been doomed. Spring 1945, the Red Army takes Berlin. On April 30th, Hitler commits suicide. In his testament, he names Dönitz as his successor. The Grand Admiral addresses the nation on radio.
Im Bewusstsein der Verantwortung übernehme ich die Führung des deutschen Volkes in dieser schicksalsschweren Stunde.
Ein Feigling und Verräter ist, wer sich gerade jetzt seiner Pflicht entzieht und damit deutschen Frauen und Kindern Tod oder Versklavung bringt.
He stubbornly refuses capitulation. To save the honor of his navy, he orders the ship scuttled. 232 U-boats dive forever. A few renegade grey wolves ignore the order and sink the last freighters of the war. On May 4th, Dönitz finally yields and signs the partial capitulation of the German Reich. The grey wolves surrender to the victors, but not all. A novel type of U-boat is still at sea, capable of crossing the Atlantic submerged and moving freely without radar detection. It could sink any ship it nears and simply vanish. But the war is over. This advanced submarine cannot change history, yet it becomes the blueprint for modern U-boats. Of roughly 40,000 German U-boat sailors, 30,000 never returned. Together with their victims, countless lives wasted senselessly. The destruction of the Allied merchant fleet was an illusion. The plan ignored America's capacity to keep launching more ships, far more than the Reich could sink. Against that industrial colossus, Dönitz stood no chance. A total of 154 U-boats surrender to the Allies. They are brought first to British ports. Churchill even has boats towed to London so the British can finally examine the fearsome grey wolves without fear, wolves that had sunk nearly 3,000 Allied ships. In November 1945, the hour of reckoning strikes the Nazi criminals. At the Nuremberg trials, Karl Dönitz stands directly behind Hermann Göring among the chief defendants. He is convicted of crimes against peace and war crimes. Thanks to skillful defense, he receives only 10 years. He was responsible for the criminal naval war that cost 72,000 Allied lives, half of them civilians. Afterwards, Dönitz manages to craft the innocent image of a career officer who supposedly wasn't a convinced National Socialist, yet Hitler entrusted him with succession. He nurtures the legend of the upright soldier right up to his death in December 1980.